Hello. Pretty amazing clouds. Welcome to a podcast. I am out on a snowy day. It's been a while since I've got to do a podcast, and I'm grateful that I get to today. I am trying to make use of the position that I am in right now, of having been, I would say, successfully married and, according to the church, successfully single. Okay, so let me explain that. That's not a claim that I'm wanting to make necessarily, but my wife and I did being single the way the church tells us we should. So we were virgins until we got married, and then we were married until death parted us. So on some level, we get good marks. We get a gold star on both both categories. So, and now I have now the problem with that is that up until now I was subjective. My evaluation of marriage was to be a little bit mistrusted because I was in it. And also I didn't know what would happen. You know, I couldn't claim that I had successfully kept my promise because I had made a promise that needed to last until a specific time, and it did. Okay, so I think I'm in a unique place of being able to be both, have been subjectively observing marriage and objectively observing marriage, of having on some surface level kept the marriage vow and gone into the marriage vow the way that the church said I should. And if you've been listening to my podcasts, you know that I'm beginning to question kind of all of what the church has said. I'm finding it more and more difficult to take it seriously for a lot of reasons. And so I am willing to ask some questions about marriage that the church has answered. And I'm going to talk about one part about that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to specifically talk about that today. And the reason I'm going to specifically talk about that today is because of this idea that marriage is the answer. That's what I grew up with. I grew up with that idea being taught to me. Marriage is the answer. Very, very much the answer. Not one of many. It was the answer. And so then you would say, well, okay, what was the question? And I don't know that there was a great deal of thought went into that. It seems like we just said it's the answer. But if I had to go back and look at it, I would say, okay, if it is the answer, what is the question? And it's something like this: marriage is the answer if the question is, can I have sex? Marriage is the answer if you say, I want to have a family, or can I have a family? And marriage is the answer if your question is, how do I be normal? Now, I want to tell you that I believe in marriage very, very strongly. I recommend it. But I do not think that it's useful to go into marriage thinking it is the answer. I think it'd be much healthier to go into marriage thinking that it is a solution, and a pretty good solution at that. Maybe even I would go so far as to say it is the best solution. But in order to say that, I need you to understand what a solution is. A solution needs to know what is the challenge that you're supposed to solve. You don't have a solution without, and you could say a solution to a problem or a solution to a challenge. I like to use the word challenge because it's not, it's a problem sounds that make, a problem makes it sound like it isn't, like there's something went wrong. Nothing went wrong. That's why I would prefer to use a challenge. But marriage is the solution to a very specific challenge. Let me sort of take a look at that. Maybe I'll set up the question first. So imagine that we were looking at how to solve a challenge. We would need to know what challenges have priority. And so let me just suggest a few. First, if we're humans, we have a challenge of making there to be more humans. Well, why would we want more humans? Well, one of the reasons you would want more humans is very personal, almost self-interested. You would want a person who would be there for you when you no longer can take care of yourself. Now, you might not have thought of that, but that's a huge thing. I mean, sort of in terms of biology, you might be able to comprehend, hey, if none of us had kids, there would be no more humans on the earth. And you'd be like, oh yeah, well, I suppose we have to reproduce. But on the other hand, you wouldn't be stupid if you said, oh, I'll let someone else do that, because other people will. Okay. But you need someone. It's not enough that there are other humans on the earth. What you need is somebody who cares about you when you get old. And having someone to care about you when you get old is one of the challenges. So let's just put that all together. The reproduction, the continuation of the species, having someone to care for you when you get old. That's one of the challenges that we need an answer to. And what is the answer? Well, the answer is to have kids. But then right away you realize, no, if that's the answer, that's pretty short-sighted. So let's talk in terms of solution. The solution is to have good kids. And I'm not talking about genetically good kids, but the solution then maybe is better to have kids that are raised right. That's very important. So challenge number one is to have some kids to take care of you and to carry on the human race. The solution to that is to make sure that you have kids that are raised well. Well, how do you raise kids well? Well, one of the top things on that list, I'm convinced, is that kids need to be raised by a mother and a father throughout their entire existence. It's not the only way, but that's one of the things that will favor your kids almost the best. Maybe better than that is to make sure that you have adequate nutrition during pregnancy. Apparently that is just terribly destructive to the brain if you're starving when you're pregnant. What's one of the best ways not to be starving when you're pregnant? Well, it probably is to have somebody personally invested in taking care of you. So even there, it seems like it doubles down on the idea that having a mother and a father well defined is one of the best ways to raise, to meet the challenge and find the solution to having well-raised kids. So that sort of anchors what would I call it? It anchors monogamy. There, I couldn't think of the word. That anchors your monogamy. This is one. Now, what about divorce? Okay, can kids survive divorce? Yes. Here's the question that I think is more relevant when it comes to splitting up once you have kids. If you need your kids to share in the challenges and pain of existence, that doesn't make you a bad parent. But if you prioritize your comfort over their pain, I think it very much, it deeply sets some time bombs for your kids to encounter. So what I'm saying is that what happens to a child who loses a parent to an accident is very different than what happens to a child whose parents are divided up because they decide that rather than doing what's best for the kid, they want to do what's best for themselves. And all around us are kids who are growing up in that situation. And there are a lot of things rising in terms of numbers and in terms of our country. Are they correlated? I don't think you could dismiss that they might not be. So let me just say, this isn't here to judge you if you have left your spouse. But this is to say, for anybody who is looking at the best possible solution to the challenge of having a well-raised child to care for you as you grow older, probably better look at staying married for the full length of that child's life. If not, you better have some extraordinarily well thought out plans and strategies of how you're going to meet that challenge. All right? I feel like I made it very complex and more vague. Anyway, first challenge is having well-raised kids. The answer is to stay together for life. So there's a solution that we're looking for. What is a way to stay together? Okay. What else? Well, it appears that humans very much want to have a unique love relationship. I mean, one of the things that puzzles me is that people who elect to not they elect to have a homosexual relationship still want to have an exclusive relationship. That's odd to me. But it speaks to me that I think we very deeply want, beyond just raising kids and having well-raised kids, we want to have a relationship with someone that in some way is exclusive. We want to be the top priority for someone else. In terms of them loving us, I think we also want to have that question answered for us. We want someone at the top of the hierarchy. We can love lots of people, but maybe our brains can't handle it if we don't say, no, this is our primary focus, and then here's a second tier and a third tier and a fourth tier, so on down. It seems pretty widespread. So I would put that down as the second challenge that we face. So the first challenge is to produce well-raised kids. The second is to have an exclusive, a priority. What am I going to call it? For this talk, I'll call it a priority love relationship. I think it would be the second. And the third is to have a partnership when you need it most. That's the third challenge, is you are going to be declining. Now, one of obviously the answers to that is to have kids, well-raised kids. I already talked about that. That's one solution for your old age. But I am suggesting that maybe you ought to look at having, and I'm not suggesting this, I'm observing that people tend to want to have a partnership. So throughout your life, having two people to come up with a strategy to raise kids, two people to undertake a task, people who have complementary but different skills to accomplish whatever it is you decide to accomplish, seems to make you far more effective. And I think you would look at marriages and you would see that very often the successful marriages have that dynamic. You have two people who aren't a carbon copy of each other. You have two people who understand that by each specializing in something different, you can have a much deeper, more effective, you can have a deeper relationship, but also you can have a more effective outreach. And that increases as you begin to decline in ability. So old age, you need someone with whom you've built a lot of trust when you were at your peak effectiveness to join you and to make easier your decline. Okay, that seems to me to be the three challenges that you're trying to meet. So if you don't think those are the right ones, then you could be done listening. But I'm going to approach it that way. We got three. Look at there, I can show you. We got three. We have to have well-raised kids for a lot of reasons, to continue the species and to help you out when you get older. It is to have a unique, prioritized love relationship with another individual, and it's to have a partnership that makes you more effective, particularly as you begin to decline in effectiveness. So if somebody were to ask you, okay, if marriage is the solution, what is it the solution to? Those are the three things I would say you need marriage to be a solution for. So at this point, don't assume you know what marriage is. Just assume you sort of know what the challenges are. So how would you figure that out if you didn't know? If you said, I can't trust the church, I can't trust social media, I can't trust things, but I want to know what is the solution to these three challenges. Well, here's what you would do. You would set up an investigation, and you would find, let's say, 1,000 people who had raised children well, who had a love relationship, a prioritized love relationship that continued through their decline. Right? So let's say you gathered, you got your pool of 1,000 people, and I'll shorten it up. They had kids, they loved each other, and they stayed married until they died. And you take those 1,000 people and you would ask them, okay, describe your relationship, describe how it started, describe how it continued, tell me about your relationship. Now, what you would get is a whole bunch of bubbles, and they would all be somewhat unique. You would start drawing them. They would have an area that everybody's relationship was different. But there would be some amount of that relationship that was the same. That overlap of all of these Venn diagrams that you remember from math in junior high. Now that overlap, that thing that they all held in common, would be what I would call, what most people would see as traditional marriage. And I think that's the proper way of looking at traditional marriage. It explains why marriage is so much the same across a lot of different traditions. It's the reason why the ceremony beginning marriage is pretty similar across different cultures. It's because it wasn't something somebody made up and said, let's have marriage be this. It is because the solution to those three particular challenges is going to be pretty much the same. You don't get to just declare, oh, I'm going to solve the problem a different way. You have to solve it in a way that works. And it turns out that there's a lot of similarity in the way that it works. So now we have some idea of a traditional idea of marriage. This is the solution to the challenge. And now you're saying, well, Jeremy, then what's your big deal? You were taught that it was the answer, and you've spent all this time, 21 minutes, telling me how it is not the answer, it's the solution. Well, here's why it's not the answer. So let's say we made a list of what traditional marriage was. The thing that was in common across these 1,000 marriages that worked. Okay, there was some idea of a commitment. There was some official recognition of that commitment in your society. So there was a promise made at a marriage ceremony. That might be. There was a idea of waiting for that. That might turn out to be pretty common. That people who had better relationships were people who had gone into it more carefully rather than gone into it with a trial and error mentality. Okay, maybe, I don't know. I'm just putting some things forward that I think were reasonable, but I'm drawing this picture. So let's say we end up with this picture of this is the best solution for marriage is to take a lot of care choosing your partner, to commit to your partner, to involve your families, to involve the social structure, and I think the other thing you would find out in those is that none of them had just stayed married because it was the easiest thing. Instead, you would find, I think, a commitment to that bond. And so that would be something that you would include in marriage. Takes a commitment to it. So you need to not give up on it when it gets difficult, but you need to face what might be a lot of difficulties, a lot of reasons why you might give up, and to say, nope, I'm not giving up. I'm committed to this idea of marriage. That would seem to me to be what marriage is. And that's kind of what was presented to me as I grew up. Okay, here's what marriage is. You wait, you select very carefully your mate, not through a process of trial and error, but through a careful vetting. Then you gather with your families, unless there's some compelling reason not to, and you commit to this marriage with some solemnity in front of some official personage. And then, having committed to that marriage, you determine to give a large amount of effort to keeping that problem. I mean, keeping I hope that's not Freudian, to keeping that commitment, even in the face of pretty daunting challenges. So you would prioritize continuing the marriage over switching people. That would be something like what would be, I think, the commonality across all of these 1,000 marriages that made it and overcame the challenge. But here's the thing, and here's the reason why I don't like looking at that as the answer. Because all of the things that you could do as if marriage was the answer, wouldn't give you a happy marriage. You see, that's the ultimate challenge. It's like, whatever marriage is, I want it to be part of making me, and I'm going to use the word happy. I know that's some sort of a fluffy word, and yet it's probably the word. I could say joyful, but if you have looked in the Bible at what a joyful marriage is, that's fine. You might think a joyful marriage it's not happy. let me just say, Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross. There is an element of joy there. You show me the picture, the story, the passion story of Christ, and you point out where the joy was set before him, and you realize, okay, joy is way deeper than happiness, and joy is more important than happiness. And you may have that in your marriage, but my point is, you would also want there to be happiness. I mean, maybe all you get is joy. I would say that there's something like joy that accompanied me through the death of my wife. It was not happiness. It was not something I liked, and yet there was something there that mattered. Okay, so I am purposely picking the fluffy word, happiness. You should want to be happily married. And you should know that there may be things that are more important than happiness. But the problem is that if you take marriage and you say marriage is the answer, then two things happen that I really don't like. And one is, you can check every box on happily married and not be happily married. Okay, so you can do everything. You can wait until you found the right person. You can marry them in your nice wedding in front of the right people with the approval of your family and his family and the officiating minister. Everybody can say, yep, this is a good thing. And you can stick it out no matter what comes, and you can have an unhappy marriage. I've seen it. As a matter of fact, I think I've seen a lot of it. But there are people who have a marriage that is the answer, who are very careful to hide the fact that it isn't a happily ever after. How much they hide it, I don't know. But I will tell you something that happens to a lot of us. If we are honest, we aren't 100% sure that the people who have marriage as the answer aren't faking it just a little bit. There are a lot of guys who, I think if they were honest, would say they wish that they had a little more active intimacy with their wife. And yet I have not ever heard within the circles of people who have marriage as an answer anyone willing to admit that. They seem to hide from that. They seem to explain it away 100 different ways. And fair enough, that's not necessarily important. I won't say it's not important, but I'll say there may be a lot of other things that are more important. But the fact that that isn't talked about within many of the traditions that say marriage is the answer makes people say, I wonder how happily ever after we're looking at. And how much we are looking at people who deny their unhappiness because they have been told that marriage is the answer. And if marriage is the answer, them admitting that they aren't living a happily ever after is disloyal. This is why I'm trying to tell you, marriage is not the answer. It is a solution. All of those little circles that we drew, marriage was the thing in common, but every one of those circles had a unique portion and a similar portion. And if you want a marriage that is a solution to raising kids well, having a prioritized love relationship, of being together in your declining years, and being happily married, you know what you got to do? You've got to focus not just on that little circle that they have in common, but you have to focus on that part that is also unique. You need a solution, not an answer. An answer boils it down to the very core, but the solution says, this is a good start. And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. These things that are common across many, many marriages that last a lifetime are not things for you to ignore, but they are not enough. I think we're missing something in our marriage ceremonies. I think that we promise well to implement the answer. But I think there needs to be an introduction to it that says, do you want to find a happily ever after? If you do, here are a few things that you need to anchor at the very core of your marriage, but you need to make an unwavering promise to figure out how both of you can find happiness. You're going to take this core of marriage and you are going to add to it creatively, intensely, vigorously. You're going to add whatever it takes until you find a marriage that brings happiness to both of you. You don't get that with the answer. You get that with pursuing a solution. I think if you're married for a lifetime, there's a good chance that choosing well at the beginning, of committing to it formally, of solemnizing it before not just whoever happens to be there, but in a social structure, and sticking it out during hard times. I think those will all be part of your marriage, but you will have to add to it figuring out how you can get that happily ever after, not by increasing your long-suffering endurance, but by constantly optimizing your marriage. So you go into it and you say, I think this will work. And then you get new stressors in your life and you say, oh, that's not working. Maybe because I'm tireder, maybe because this is longer than I thought it was going to be. We had gone out for a couple years, we didn't run into this, but now it's been 5 years and we're bumping into the things. We have to improve our marriage. So what I believe is that you have to start out your marriage with a commitment to any time that you notice a pattern of unhappiness. That's not a single moment of unhappiness, but anytime you observe in yourself or in your partner a pattern of unhappiness, you have to address it. Why wouldn't you? Well, I'll tell you why you wouldn't. Because an awful lot of the time when there's a pattern of unhappiness, it really seems like maybe the best thing would be just don't notice it. Don't mention it. Don't admit it. There could be a feeling that if we admit to this deep unhappiness, it will destroy our marriage. And it might. Except that you have the promise. And what is your promise? Well, turns out your promise isn't quite what you thought it was. It felt like your promise was to implement marriage as the answer. That's what we're going to do. We're going to set up marriage this right way, and then we're going to stick it out no matter what. But what if your promise is to optimize? Well, the reason people won't tell you to do that is because it could be construed as, oh, improve whatever it takes for you to be happy. Oh, well, I'm not happy with this person. I'll try that person. Well, that's the limit. Marriage should be a commitment to optimize. Anytime you notice a pattern of unhappiness, to optimize your marriage, to optimize any and everything except who you're going to optimize with. You go to your partner and you say, I am not going to keep on trying to just endure more and more unhappiness. I'm going to optimize everything except you are always going to be my optimizing partner. I'm going to look at the pattern of unhappiness that I'm enduring right now. And I'm going to admit it. I'm going to say, I could be, and this is the important part, I could be more unhappy. Things could be worse, but things could be better. So what could we improve? And at the top of your list, write it in. I could switch people. Well, cross it off now. That's not on my list anymore. Not because it couldn't be, but because A, I don't think it would work. And B, seriously, do you really think it would work? How many people have you found who really got a lot better choice? Unless, of course, they had made their early choices. So you have some people who went into marriage and didn't implement a traditional marriage. So they didn't vet the person carefully. They didn't have the approval of the family. They didn't have support of the cultural norms that they could belong to. And they weren't well taught in how to commit to marriage. Okay, so yes, if there may be some people who went into marriage foolishly and then succeeded by going into marriage wisely. Well, fair enough, but that's not what we're talking about. We're saying, okay, you went into marriage wisely to the best of your ability. You're young and dumb. You made this commitment. But the thing that isn't going to fix it is to go and get a different person. Why? Because you committed to it. But why else? Because it's probably not going to work. So you aren't losing a lot when on the top of your list you cross off, not going to switch people. And then you start writing, what are the other things that could make us happier? We'll start trying them. I think the commitment you need to look at making is saying, I am going to optimize absolutely everything except who I'm going to optimize with. You are my partner. We are going to make this marriage better. If you decide that you can have this marriage by demanding that I endure and that you endure, I'm going to challenge that. You're going to have a fight on your hands every day of our marriage from now on, because we are not going to endure our way into a good marriage. We are going to discover our way into a good marriage. We are going to experiment our way into a good marriage. We are going to try everything except switching people. Maybe at first you'd get a bad reaction. I think in the long run, you would get a grateful reaction. We are going to find a better way to be married. We are going to find our happily ever after. That's what I want to call people to. That's why I'm making this podcast. If someone had been watching me at 22 when I made the promise to love my wife in sickness and in health until death do us part, they would have rightly laughed at me and said, Jeremy, you got no idea what you're promising. Everything you think is so foolish and immature. And they'd be right. But I did it. I tried for a while to endure my way to a better marriage. I am thankful that Mary and I stopped that. And maybe, I don't know how long, 5, 6 years ago, we decided that we were going to stop enduring our way into a successful marriage. And we were going to discover and experiment and even argue our way into a marriage that was a happily ever after for both of us. Please decide today that you want a solution, not an answer. You can have an answer, right? You can find people who will say, this is marriage, and if you do it the way they say, they will give you an A+. And if you value that, then go ahead, get their A+, get their star on your report card. Have them tell you, yep, you did it right. But way too many people who have a gold star on their marriage card do not seem happy to me. Maybe they're joyful in some deep meaning of joy. Maybe it's fulfilling in some spiritualized meaning of fulfilling, but they're not living a happily ever after. So even if they act like it is some sort of rebellion for you to decide that you want a happily ever after, decide you're going to do it. Decide you want a happily ever after. Marriage was a good way to start. The commonality across thousands of people, that's a great thing. Don't just ignore that. Don't say, oh, we're so different. No, a large part of your marriage is going to fit into that. But from that, do not think that doing that minimum, that thing that you all have in common, is going to give you the happily ever after. It is going to put you on a good path, but you are going to have to be courageous enough to say, I want that happily ever after. That I'm going to put everything on the table. I'm going to seek it with all my heart. I am going to optimize everything, but who I am going to optimize with. I think you can get it. I honestly do. I try to think of the worst marriages that I know. And I think if they had this attitude, even they could turn. I guess I'm admitting that when I say that maybe one of the biggest problems in marriages are the people who think that marriage is an answer, and they quit trying to solve it. Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not trying to solve the question of marriage. I'm trying to give you hope that a happily ever after is in store for you. If you want my help, get a hold of me. uipodcast at proton.me. I don't know. I would love it if thousands or tens of thousands of people contacted me and I would say, I just don't have time. I don't know what I'll do then, but for now, I'm pretty sure that you could have some time and I could share with you some of my hope. So get in touch. Just don't give up. I think there's a happily ever after waiting for you. Mary and I made the death do us part list. But thank God we started working on the happily ever after list. You have today. Believe in your marriage. And I wish you happy trails.